history remembers the Black Death as a plague. But to the people who lived through it, it began as something far more ordinary, a ship arriving quietly in the harbor. More than 600 years ago, an invisible enemy began a journey that would change Europe forever. Hidden among ordinary cargo, it crossed seas unnoticed while life continued as usual. Before we begin, if you enjoy peaceful history documentaries like this one, please consider taking a quiet moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue creating relaxing journeys through history designed to help you unwind, learn something new, and gently drift off to sleep. Now, make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights if you wish. Take a slow, gentle breath and let history quietly carry you back to medieval Europe, where everything still seemed peaceful and no one yet realized that history was about to change forever. This is the true story of the Black Death. Long before the Black Death became one of history's most devastating pandemics, Europe was experiencing a period of remarkable growth. During the early 14th century, cities expanded, trade flourished, and communities grew larger than ever before. Life was far from perfect, yet for many people, the future seemed stable and predictable. Every morning began much the same way. Church bells echoed across towns, merchants prepared their market stalls, craftsmen opened the doors to their workshops, and farmers walked into the surrounding fields before the sun climbed high into the sky. The rhythm of daily life had changed very little for generations, and few imagined that anything could interrupt it. Medieval Europe was deeply connected to the land. Most families lived in small villages surrounded by farmland where wheat, barley, and vegetables provided their food throughout the year. Oxen slowly pulled wooden plows across fertile fields, while shepherds watched over sheep grazing on nearby hills. The changing seasons determined nearly every part of life. Spring brought planting, summer meant long days of work beneath the sun, autumn filled barns with grain, and winter encouraged families to gather beside warm fireplaces while preparing for another year ahead. In the growing towns and cities, life was considerably busier. Narrow stone streets filled with merchants selling bread, cloth, pottery, spices, candles, and tools. Blacksmiths shaped glowing iron into horseshoes and farming equipment, while carpenters built homes, wagons, and furniture from freshly cut timber. Bakers filled the streets with the comforting smell of warm bread each morning, and travelers arriving from distant regions carried stories of lands many people would never see themselves. Markets were not only places of trade, but also centers of conversation, entertainment, and news. Here, people exchanged ideas alongside goods, creating a world that felt increasingly connected. Religion stood at the heart of medieval society. Towering churches and magnificent cathedrals dominated the skylines of both large cities and small towns. The sound of church bells marked the beginning and end of each day, while festivals, weddings, baptisms, and funerals all revolved around the local church. Monasteries preserved knowledge by carefully copying books by hand, page after page, preserving history, philosophy, and religious teachings for future generations. Few people could read, but stories, traditions, and faith passed naturally from one generation to the next. Although daily life required constant hard work, moments of joy were never absent. Families gathered for meals after long days in the fields. Children played in village squares, while musicians entertained crowds during local festivals. Merchants celebrated successful journeys, craftsmen took pride in their work, and neighbors supported one another through both good harvests and difficult winters. It was a world built upon routine, community, and quiet expectations for tomorrow. Looking back today, it is easy to imagine that disaster was already approaching. Yet the people living in Europe during those peaceful years knew nothing of what lay ahead. Ships continued arriving in busy ports. Roads remained crowded with traders and pilgrims. Farmers prepared for another harvest, and families planned for another ordinary season. To them, life simply continued, one familiar day after another. They could not know that somewhere beyond the horizon, an invisible traveler had already begun its journey toward Europe, bringing with it a chapter of history that would forever change the world. The Europe of the 14th century was no longer an isolated collection of kingdoms. It had become part of a vast network of trade that stretched across continents. Goods, ideas, cultures, and people traveled farther than ever before. Busy roads connected villages to great cities, while rivers and seas linked Europe with distant lands that many could only imagine. Every journey brought new opportunities, and every arriving ship carried the promise of prosperity. Some of the busiest ports in Europe stood along the Mediterranean Sea. Cities such as Venice, Genoa, and Constantinople welcomed merchant vessels from every direction. Their harbors were filled with sailors unloading spices, silk, precious metals, fine fabrics, and countless other goods that had traveled thousands of miles. Warehouses overflowed with valuable cargo, while merchants carefully negotiated prices in crowded marketplaces. These cities had become the beating heart of international commerce. Beyond Europe, enormous trade routes stretched eastward toward Persia, India, and China. The famous Silk Road carried luxury goods across deserts and mountains, passing through dozens of kingdoms before finally reaching European markets. Although few travelers completed the entire journey, merchants exchanged goods from one region to another until products from the farthest corners of Asia eventually appeared on the shelves of European shops. Pepper, cinnamon, silk, porcelain, and rare medicines became symbols of wealth and success. The sea offered an even faster connection. Merchant ships crossed the Mediterranean almost constantly, carrying food, timber, wool, wine, grain, and valuable cargo between ports. Every voyage depended upon favorable winds and experienced sailors who understood the changing seasons. Harbors remained busy throughout the year as ships arrived one after another, bringing fresh supplies and new business opportunities. To the people living in these cities, the endless movement of trade represented progress and stability. Travel was not limited to merchants alone. Pilgrims journeyed to sacred religious sites, students traveled to universities, diplomats crossed borders to negotiate treaties, and craftsmen searched for new opportunities in growing towns. Every road carried a steady stream of people moving from one destination to another. Europe had become more connected than at any previous time in its history. This growing network transformed medieval society in remarkable ways. Cities became wealthier, knowledge spread more quickly, and cultures influenced one another through constant contact. Yet every connection carried unseen risks as well. No merchant inspecting valuable cargo could imagine that danger might hide among ordinary supplies. No sailor preparing his ship for another voyage suspected that an invisible passenger might already be aboard. To everyone involved, these were simply ordinary journeys that had taken place for generations. Looking back today, historians understand that the same trade routes which brought prosperity would soon carry something far more powerful than silk or spices. The roads that connected kingdoms, the ships that united continents, and the markets that enriched entire cities would unknowingly become the pathways of one of history's greatest disasters. But for now, Europe remained confident. Business continued, ships sailed, and life moved forward exactly as it always had, unaware that history was quietly changing course beyond the horizon. For centuries, diseases had appeared and disappeared across different parts of the world. Most remained local, affecting only nearby villages or regions before eventually fading away. But in the early 14th century, something very different began to emerge far beyond Europe's borders. Historians believe the disease that would later become known as the Black Death most likely originated somewhere in Central Asia, where vast grasslands, deserts, and mountain ranges connected distant civilizations through ancient trade routes. Long before anyone understood the existence of bacteria or infection, the plague was already beginning its silent journey westward. Merchant caravans crossed the Silk Road carrying silk, spices, precious metals, and countless other valuable goods. Every stop along the journey brought together traders, travelers, animals, and supplies from many different regions. These busy trading centers allowed ideas and cultures to spread across continents, but they also created the perfect conditions for disease to travel unnoticed. Hidden among sacks of grain, bundles of cloth, and wooden cargo were black rats searching for food during the long journey. Living alongside them were tiny fleas that carried a deadly bacterium called Yersinia pestis. Although nobody at the time could possibly know such an organism existed, the merchants saw only ordinary rats, something common in every warehouse, market, and ship. They had no reason to fear them. As caravans reached major ports along the Black Sea, cargo was transferred onto merchant ships bound for Europe. Barrels, grain, fabrics, spices, and other goods were loaded carefully onto wooden vessels preparing to cross the Mediterranean. The rats climbed aboard, unnoticed, following the food that humans had stored for the voyage. To the sailors, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. The weather was favorable, the cargo was valuable, and another successful trading season seemed to be unfolding. The sea connected civilizations, just as roads connected kingdoms. Ships arrived almost every day, bringing wealth, opportunity, and news from distant lands. No harbor master inspecting cargo could see the invisible danger that had quietly joined the voyage. No merchant celebrating another profitable shipment imagined that history itself had stepped aboard. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Yet beneath the wooden decks of these busy ships, a journey was taking place that would soon reshape the lives of millions. The greatest tragedy in medieval Europe did not begin with armies crossing borders or kingdoms declaring war. It began with ordinary trade, ordinary travel, and ordinary people simply doing their daily work, completely unaware that the world around them was about to change forever. When the first merchant ships arrived in European ports carrying the plague, nothing appeared unusual. Their sails were full, their cargo was valuable, and their crews expected another routine arrival. Dock workers hurried to unload barrels, sacks of grain, spices, and fine fabrics, while merchants eagerly inspected goods that had traveled thousands of miles. Markets remained crowded, inns welcomed travelers, and church bells continued to ring as they always had. Life carried on without the slightest suspicion that something extraordinary had entered the city. Within days, however, strange illnesses began to appear. At first, only a handful of people complained of fever, exhaustion, and severe headaches. Many believed they were suffering from an ordinary sickness brought on by hard work or changing weather. Physicians recommended rest, herbal remedies, or prayer, expecting their patients to recover as they usually did. Instead, their condition worsened with frightening speed. Painful swellings appeared beneath the arms, around the neck, and in the groin. High fevers became unbearable, and many victims grew too weak to leave their beds. Families gathered around loved ones, hoping the illness would pass, but each day brought more suffering. Before long, neighbors who had visited the sick began showing the same symptoms. Entire households became ill within only a few days. Physicians had never witnessed a disease spreading with such speed. They searched through ancient medical texts, mixed herbal medicines, burned fragrant plants, and even advised people to avoid foul-smelling air, believing poisonous vapors carried disease. None of these treatments slowed the plague. Fear slowly replaced confidence. Rumors spread from one street to another as people searched desperately for answers. Some believed the disease was a punishment from God. Others blamed unusual weather, rare planetary alignments, or mysterious forces they could not explain. Without understanding bacteria or infection, medieval society tried to explain the unimaginable, using the knowledge available at the time. Meanwhile, ships continued arriving, merchants continued trading, and travelers continued moving from city to city, unknowingly helping the disease spread even farther. What had begun as a few isolated cases was quietly becoming something far greater. Europe still believed it was facing another difficult illness that would eventually disappear. No one yet realized they were witnessing the beginning of one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, a catastrophe that would soon touch nearly every town, every village, and every family across the continent. For many people, the first sign of the plague was so ordinary that it barely seemed worth mentioning. A slight fever, a headache, an unusual feeling of exhaustion after a normal day's work. Farmers blamed the weather. Merchants thought they had caught a cold while traveling. Sailors assumed they were simply worn out after weeks at sea. Nobody imagined that these small discomforts marked the beginning of one of history's deadliest disasters. Within a day or two, the illness became impossible to ignore. The fever climbed rapidly. Chills shook the body even during the warmth of summer. Muscles weakened, breathing became difficult, and every movement required effort. Families gathered around the sick, believing that rest, warm blankets, herbal remedies, and prayer would soon bring recovery. Instead, the disease continued its relentless advance. Then came the symptom that terrified entire communities. Painful swellings appeared beneath the arms, around the neck, or in the groin. These swollen lymph nodes, later called buboes, could grow to the size of an egg or even an apple. Their dark color and unbearable pain made them impossible to hide. People quickly learned that when these swellings appeared, survival became uncertain. No one understood why the buboes formed. Medieval physicians believed the body was trying to expel poisoned blood. Others thought invisible corruption had entered through the air. Some believed the swelling was God's visible mark upon sinners. Without scientific knowledge, every explanation seemed as believable as the next. As patients grew weaker, many became overwhelmed by thirst, confusion, and unbearable fatigue. Some drifted in and out of consciousness, while family members desperately searched for priests, healers, or anyone who might offer hope. Every household relied on different remedies. Vinegar was rubbed onto the skin. Sweet-smelling herbs were carried beneath the nose. Fires burned day and night to cleanse the air. Religious relics were placed beside beds, while prayers echoed through homes and churches alike. None of these treatments could stop the infections spreading through the body. Inside each patient, bacteria multiplied rapidly within the lymphatic system. Although no one living in the 14th century could possibly know such organisms existed, to them, the disease behaved like an invisible curse that ignored wealth, age, and social status. The speed of the illness created even greater fear. A neighbor who appeared healthy on Monday might be gravely ill by Wednesday and buried before the weekend. Families watched loved ones disappear within days, leaving behind unanswered questions and silent homes. Entire villages began measuring time, not by seasons or harvests, but by funerals. Doctors themselves faced impossible choices. Every visit placed them in danger, yet abandoning the sick violated both duty and faith. Wearing long robes, carrying bags of herbs and handwritten medical texts, they traveled from house to house with little more than experience and hope. Some genuinely wished to help. Others quietly admitted there was almost nothing they could do. As deaths multiplied, one frightening realization spread faster than any official announcement. This disease did not behave like the illnesses people already knew. It moved with terrifying speed, struck entire families, and ignored every remedy that had once offered comfort. Europe was no longer facing an ordinary epidemic. It was witnessing the beginning of a catastrophe that would soon transform every corner of medieval society. As the plague spread from one household to the next, fear began changing the way people lived. Families who had always cared for one another suddenly faced impossible decisions. A father wondered whether to stay beside his sick child or protect the rest of the family. A daughter hesitated before entering her mother's room. Every act of kindness carried the risk of death, and every moment of hesitation brought feelings of guilt. Many people tried to escape before the disease reached their town. Wealthy merchants packed their belongings and fled to country estates. Noble families abandoned castles, surrounded by crowded villages, and searched for isolated homes in the countryside. Some believed that fresh air and distance from busy cities would keep them safe. Occasionally it worked, but often the plague arrived soon afterward, carried unknowingly by travelers, carts, or the rats and fleas that accompanied them. Those too poor to leave had little choice but to remain where they were. Narrow streets filled with refuse, crowded wooden houses, and limited supplies of clean water created ideal conditions for disease. Families continued living side by side because survival depended on sharing food, shelter, and daily work. Isolation, a concept familiar today, was nearly impossible for most medieval people. Church bells rang almost constantly. What had once marked the passing of the hours now announced another death. Funerals became so frequent that priests struggled to keep pace. In many places, the usual ceremonies grew shorter as the number of burials increased. Sometimes there was no time for individual graves. Large burial pits were opened outside city walls where dozens of victims rested together beneath the same layer of earth. Markets that had once echoed with conversation became strangely quiet. Shops closed because owners were sick or dead. Ships remained in harbors without crews to unload them. Workshops stood empty as skilled craftsmen disappeared one after another. Trade slowed, supplies became uncertain, and everyday life gradually lost its familiar rhythm. Rumors spread almost as quickly as the disease itself. Some claimed the plague had been brought by strangers from distant lands. Others whispered that poisoned wells or secret conspiracies were responsible. Fear searched desperately for answers, and when none could be found, suspicion often replaced reason. Innocent people were blamed simply because they seemed different or unfamiliar. Despite the overwhelming despair, remarkable acts of courage also appeared. Some physicians continued treating patients, although they knew the danger. Monks and nuns remained inside monasteries to care for the dying. Neighbors quietly left food outside the homes of families too frightened to leave their doors. Mothers comforted children even while battling the disease themselves. These small acts of compassion rarely changed the outcome, but they preserved something equally important: the humanity of those living through unimaginable suffering. By the end of the first Great Wave, entire communities had been transformed. Empty houses stood beside abandoned fields. Familiar faces had vanished from streets that once felt alive. Survivors carried memories that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. The plague had become more than a disease. It had become a force that reshaped fear, faith, family, and the very meaning of everyday life. By the year 1348, the Black Death had spread across much of Europe with astonishing speed. From the ports of Italy, it reached France, the kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula, the Holy Roman Empire, England, and beyond. Roads that had once carried merchants, pilgrims, and travelers now carried fear. No kingdom was large enough, no village remote enough, and no castle strong enough to guarantee safety from the advancing plague. In many towns, local leaders tried to protect their communities using the knowledge available to them. Guards were placed at city gates to question newcomers. Travelers arriving from infected regions were sometimes turned away, while others were ordered to remain outside the walls for several days before entering. Although they did not understand bacteria or fleas, people had begun to notice that limiting contact with outsiders could sometimes slow the arrival of the disease. Some ports adopted even stricter measures. Ships arriving from distant lands were forbidden from unloading immediately. Crews were instructed to remain aboard or wait in isolated areas before entering the city. These early attempts at isolation were imperfect and often introduced too late, but they marked one of history's first organized efforts to control the spread of an epidemic. Centuries later, such practices would evolve into the system we now know as quarantine. Inside the cities, daily life became increasingly difficult. Bakers struggled to find workers. Mills stood silent because there was no one to grind grain. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons disappeared from their workshops. Every profession lost experienced men and women. Even when food remained available, there were often too few healthy people left to transport it, sell it, or prepare it. The countryside suffered as well. Farmers fell ill before crops could be harvested. Livestock wandered unattended through empty fields, fruit rotted on the trees, and vegetables remained uncollected in abandoned gardens. The plague did not only take lives, it interrupted the entire cycle of food production that sustained medieval society. As supplies became uncertain, hunger joined disease as another growing threat. Religious life also changed dramatically. Churches filled with frightened worshippers seeking comfort, forgiveness, and hope. Public prayers, processions, and days of fasting became increasingly common. Many sincerely believed that greater devotion would persuade God to end the disaster. Others questioned why so many faithful people continued to die despite their prayers. For some, faith grew stronger. For others, painful doubt quietly took root. Across Europe, people searched desperately for patterns that might explain the catastrophe. Astrologers blamed unusual alignments of the planets. Physicians debated poisonous vapors rising from the earth. Scholars copied ancient medical texts, hoping forgotten wisdom might contain an answer. Yet with every passing week, the number of graves continued to grow, and certainty became harder to find. The Black Death had become more than a medical crisis. It was testing every institution medieval society depended upon: government, religion, trade, agriculture, and family. The old world was beginning to crack under the weight of a disaster no one truly understood, and its consequences would continue long after the epidemic itself had begun to fade. As the months passed, it became clear that the Black Death was changing Europe in ways no one had imagined. The tragedy was no longer measured only by the number of graves. Entire communities had lost so many people that the ordinary routines of life could no longer continue. The plague was quietly reshaping society itself. In countless villages, there were simply not enough hands left to work the land. Fields that had been carefully cultivated for generations were abandoned. Roads became overgrown with grass, and empty cottages slowly fell into ruin. Nature began reclaiming places that had once echoed with the sounds of farming, trade, and daily life. The shortage of workers created unexpected consequences. Landowners who had once commanded large numbers of laborers suddenly found themselves competing for anyone strong enough to work. Surviving farmers and craftsmen realized that their skills had become more valuable than ever before. In many regions, wages slowly began to rise, giving ordinary workers opportunities that had rarely existed before the plague. Not everyone welcomed these changes. Many rulers and wealthy landowners tried to prevent workers from demanding higher pay. Old laws were enforced more strictly, and new regulations attempted to freeze wages at earlier levels. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to restore the old social order. Too much had changed, and too many people were gone. The plague also altered the relationship between people and authority. For centuries, many believed that kings, nobles, physicians, and religious leaders possessed answers to life's greatest challenges. Yet the Black Death had shown that wealth could not buy safety, power could not command the disease to stop, and knowledge alone could not explain its terrible advance. Confidence in long-established institutions was quietly weakened. Artists, writers, and chroniclers recorded what they had witnessed so future generations would remember. They described silent streets, abandoned homes, overflowing cemeteries, and families separated by fear. Their accounts reveal not only the horror of the epidemic, but also the resilience of those who survived. Even in the darkest years, people continued to rebuild homes, reopen markets, plant crops, and care for their children. Life, though forever changed, continued. Modern science now tells us that the Black Death was primarily caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, usually transmitted by fleas carried on rats, though in some forms it also spread directly between people through respiratory droplets. Medieval Europeans could not have known this. They faced an invisible enemy without microscopes, antibiotics, or an understanding of infectious disease. Considering the knowledge available at the time, many of their actions were desperate attempts to make sense of an unimaginable crisis rather than simple superstition. By the early 1350s, the first great wave of the epidemic had finally begun to fade in many parts of Europe. But the Black Death had not truly disappeared. It would return again and again over the following centuries, reminding every generation that the disaster of 1347 had not been a single event, but the beginning of a long and recurring struggle. When the silence finally settled over Europe, survivors looked upon a continent that no longer resembled the one they had known only a few years before. Millions had vanished, old certainties had been shaken, and history itself had taken a new direction. The world that emerged after the Black Death would never be quite the same again. Although the first great wave of the Black Death eventually began to fade, Europe did not simply return to the life it had known before 1347. The epidemic had left behind more than empty houses and silent churchyards. It had changed the balance of society in ways that would shape the continent for generations. Survivors walked through familiar streets that no longer felt familiar. Entire neighborhoods had disappeared. Workshops remained abandoned. Fields lay uncultivated, and countless villages had lost so many inhabitants that they could barely function. In some places, travelers passed through settlements where only a handful of people remained alive. The silence itself became one of the most powerful memories of the plague. Birds sang where crowded markets had once echoed with conversation, and weeds slowly covered paths that had connected homes for centuries. Families now faced the difficult task of rebuilding lives that had been broken almost overnight. Husbands searched for wives who had fled to distant relatives. Parents hoped children sent away before the epidemic had survived. Brothers and sisters attempted to discover who was still alive and who had already been buried in anonymous graves. The legal system struggled to keep pace with the enormous number of deaths. Wills had to be read, property had to be redistributed, and disputes over land became increasingly common because entire family lines had disappeared within only a few months. Some people unexpectedly inherited farms, businesses, or large estates from relatives they had never expected to outlive. Others returned home only to discover that every member of their family was gone, leaving them completely alone in the world. The sudden loss of so many workers transformed everyday life in ways few had predicted. For centuries, many peasants had been tied to the land, working under strict obligations to powerful landowners. After the plague, however, labor had become one of the rarest and most valuable resources in Europe. Landowners desperately needed people to cultivate fields, repair buildings, harvest crops, and care for livestock. Surviving workers gradually realized that they possessed something they had never truly held before: bargaining power. In many regions, they began requesting higher wages, shorter obligations, or better living conditions before agreeing to work. Some refused to remain on the estates where their parents and grandparents had spent their entire lives. Instead, they traveled toward growing towns and prosperous cities where skilled labor could command even greater rewards. Governments and nobles often resisted these changes. Laws were introduced in several kingdoms attempting to force wages back to their earlier levels or prevent workers from leaving their employers. Yet enforcing such laws became increasingly difficult. Too many villages stood half empty, and too many employers competed for too few laborers. Slowly, the foundations of the medieval feudal system began to weaken. Historians continue to debate exactly how important the Black Death was in this transformation, but few deny that the epidemic accelerated changes already beginning beneath the surface of European society. Cities also learned painful lessons from the disaster. Although people still misunderstood the true cause of the disease, many local authorities became far more concerned with sanitation than ever before. Streets were cleaned more regularly, waste disposal received greater attention, and officials increasingly recognized that crowded neighborhoods often suffered the highest death tolls. New regulations attempted to improve marketplaces, water supplies, and urban cleanliness. These efforts could not prevent every future epidemic, but they represented some of the earliest steps toward organized public health. The plague had revealed weaknesses that could no longer be ignored, and slowly, imperfectly, communities began trying to build a safer future from the ruins of unimaginable loss. The Black Death did not disappear when the first epidemic came to an end. Instead, it became a recurring visitor that returned to Europe again and again over the following centuries. Every generation remembered stories told by parents and grandparents about the terrible years when death had walked through every street. Whenever a new outbreak appeared, old fears immediately returned. Church bells rang once more, doors were closed, markets emptied, and anxious families wondered whether history was about to repeat itself. Yet with every epidemic, people also gained a little more experience. Communities slowly learned that limiting contact with infected areas sometimes reduced the spread of disease. Ports became more cautious about arriving ships. Cities paid closer attention to travelers, and local officials gradually accepted that organized action could save lives even if they still misunderstood the true cause of the illness. These lessons accumulated slowly across hundreds of years and eventually formed the foundation of many public health practices that are still used today. The plague also left a lasting mark on science. Medieval physicians had relied heavily upon ancient authorities, believing that the greatest medical knowledge had already been discovered centuries earlier. The repeated failure of traditional treatments encouraged some scholars to observe the natural world more carefully instead of simply repeating old ideas. Although true scientific medicine would not emerge for many generations, the Black Death became one of the events that encouraged Europeans to question accepted beliefs and search for evidence rather than tradition alone. The influence of the plague reached beyond medicine. Literature, painting, sculpture, music, and architecture all reflected a society that had looked directly into the face of mortality. Artists filled churches and manuscripts with images reminding people that wealth, beauty, youth, and power could disappear without warning. The famous idea of the dance of death, showing kings, merchants, peasants, priests, and children all led away by the same skeletal figure, reminded medieval audiences that death treated every human being equally. It was a powerful message in a world where millions had witnessed exactly that reality. Economically, Europe continued to change, with fewer people competing for land and employment. Living standards gradually improved for many survivors. Better wages allowed some families to purchase goods that had once been beyond their reach. Farmers experimented with different crops. Landowners changed the way estates were managed, and growing towns attracted skilled workers from the countryside. Over time, these developments contributed to broader economic and social transformations that helped prepare Europe for the Renaissance and the centuries of change that followed. Historians are careful not to claim that the Black Death alone created the modern world, but few events affected so many aspects of society at the same time. It altered population, agriculture, economics, religion, politics, medicine, education, and culture. The epidemic became one of history's great turning points, not because it was planned or controlled by anyone, but because millions of ordinary lives were interrupted all at once. Today, modern medicine understands the bacterium responsible for the disease. Antibiotics can successfully treat many infections, and public health systems monitor outbreaks with tools that medieval physicians could never have imagined. Yet the story of the Black Death remains deeply relevant. It reminds us that human civilization, no matter how advanced, is always connected by travel, trade, and shared vulnerability. It also reminds us that knowledge grows through experience, observation, and the determination to learn from even the darkest chapters of history. More than 6 centuries have passed since the first great wave of the Black Death swept across Europe. Yet historians, archaeologists, and scientists are still uncovering new pieces of its story. The plague never truly became just another chapter in a history book. It left physical evidence beneath the streets of modern cities, inside forgotten cemeteries, beneath ancient churches, and in the silent remains of thousands of people whose lives ended during those terrible years. Every excavation adds another small piece to a puzzle that began in the 14th century. In places such as London, Paris, Lubeck, Barcelona, and many other historic cities, construction projects have unexpectedly uncovered mass graves where victims were buried with extraordinary speed. Archaeologists carefully examine each skeleton, recording age, health, injuries, and burial position. These discoveries reveal not only how people died, but also how communities struggled to cope with overwhelming loss. Some graves contain carefully arranged bodies, showing that even during the height of the epidemic, families and religious workers still tried to preserve dignity and respect for the dead whenever possible. Others reveal the desperation of moments when there were simply too many victims and too few survivors left to perform traditional funeral rites. Modern science has allowed researchers to ask questions that medieval physicians could never have imagined. Tiny samples taken from ancient teeth often preserve microscopic traces of DNA protected inside the dental pulp. Using advanced genetic analysis, scientists have confirmed that many victims carried the bacterium Yersinia pestis, providing direct biological evidence for what medieval chroniclers described centuries ago. Even more remarkably, researchers have been able to compare ancient bacterial DNA with modern strains, tracing how the organism evolved and spread across continents over hundreds of years. These discoveries have transformed the study of history into a partnership between archaeology, medicine, biology, and genetics. Written records alone no longer tell the entire story. The victims themselves continue speaking through the evidence they left behind. Historians have also come to understand that the Black Death cannot be explained by a single cause or viewed as an isolated event. It emerged from a world connected by trade routes stretching across Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. Merchant caravans, crowded ports, busy marketplaces, and expanding cities created opportunities not only for commerce, but also for disease. The very networks that allowed ideas, inventions, spices, silk, and precious metals to travel between civilizations also allowed invisible organisms to move with astonishing efficiency. In many ways, the Black Death became one of history's earliest reminders that humanity had already become deeply interconnected long before the modern age. The epidemic also changed the way historians think about the forces that shape civilization. For centuries, history was often told through the lives of kings, queens, generals, and emperors. Today, scholars increasingly recognize that climate, disease, environment, and ordinary people can redirect history just as profoundly as armies or political decisions. The Black Death did not conquer Europe through military invasion, yet it transformed economies, weakened long-established institutions, altered labor systems, accelerated social change, influenced religious thought, and reshaped everyday life for millions. Few events have affected so many different aspects of human society at the same time. Perhaps the most remarkable lesson is that every generation continues asking the same questions. How should communities respond when facing an unknown disease? How can fear be prevented from becoming panic? How do people balance compassion with self-protection? Medieval Europeans searched desperately for answers using the knowledge available to them. Many of their conclusions proved incorrect, yet their determination to understand the disaster was deeply human. Looking back across more than 600 years, it becomes clear that the Black Death is not remembered simply because it was one of history's deadliest pandemics. It endures because it reveals both the vulnerability and the resilience of humanity. It reminds us that knowledge grows slowly, that science advances through observation and evidence, and that even after unimaginable suffering, societies possess an extraordinary ability to recover, rebuild, and continue writing the next chapter of history. As the centuries passed, the Black Death slowly became history instead of living memory. The voices of those who witnessed the epidemic gradually fell silent, replaced by handwritten chronicles, weathered gravestones, forgotten cemeteries, and fragile manuscripts preserved in monasteries and libraries. Yet their experiences were never truly lost. Every generation returned to their stories, searching for answers about suffering, survival, and the remarkable resilience of ordinary people. Today, when we walk through the medieval streets of cities that survived the plague, it is easy to admire the beautiful cathedrals, ancient bridges, and market squares without realizing that many of them once stood in the shadow of unimaginable loss. Beneath those same streets lie the remains of countless men, women, and children whose names have long since disappeared from history. They were not kings or queens. Most never wrote books or commanded armies. They were merchants loading ships before sunrise, farmers tending fields outside village walls, blacksmiths shaping iron beside glowing fires, mothers comforting frightened children, monks copying manuscripts by candlelight, physicians carrying simple bags of herbs from one patient to the next. Their lives rarely appeared in official records, yet together they formed the foundation of medieval society. The Black Death reminds us that history is not only made by famous individuals, it is also shaped by millions of ordinary people whose quiet lives influence the future in ways they could never imagine. The epidemic altered Europe's population, transformed its economy, weakened old systems of power, encouraged new ways of thinking, and slowly helped create the conditions from which the Renaissance would eventually emerge. It was not the only cause of these changes, but it accelerated many of them. In the decades that followed, artists painted with new perspectives, scholars questioned ancient assumptions, universities expanded their influence, trade recovered along new routes, and cities slowly filled once again with the sounds of daily life. Children born after the plague grew up knowing the epidemic only through stories told by their grandparents. For them, the empty houses became occupied once more, abandoned fields returned to cultivation, and life continued its endless rhythm. History has shown again and again that humanity possesses an extraordinary ability to rebuild after catastrophe. Wars end, cities are reconstructed, knowledge returns, families begin again, and hope quietly grows where despair once seemed permanent. That may be the greatest lesson left behind by the Black Death. It was one of the darkest disasters in human history, claiming millions of lives and leaving deep scars across continents. Yet it did not mark the end of civilization. Instead, it became part of humanity's long journey of learning, adapting, and moving forward. Even today, the story continues to inspire historians, scientists, archaeologists, and countless curious minds who seek to understand how the past has shaped the world we now call home. Perhaps that is why the Black Death still matters after nearly 700 years. It reminds us that knowledge can overcome fear, that compassion can survive even in the hardest times, and that every generation leaves behind lessons for those who follow. Somewhere beneath the quiet streets of Europe, the evidence of that terrible pandemic still rests peacefully beneath the earth, while above, life continues, much as it always has. Seasons change, children laugh, bells ring once more, markets open with the morning sun, and travelers cross the same roads that merchants once followed so many centuries ago. The world keeps turning, carrying with it the memory of those who came before us. Their story has become part of our story, and their resilience remains one of history's greatest legacies. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey through history. If you enjoyed this peaceful exploration, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps this channel continue creating long, relaxing history documentaries designed to help you unwind, learn something new, and gently drift off to sleep. If there is another historical mystery or forgotten civilization you would like to explore in a future episode, feel free to share your suggestion in the comments below. I always enjoy reading your ideas. And now, wherever you are in the world, I hope you can leave behind the noise of the day, slow your thoughts, and enjoy a peaceful night's rest. Thank you for spending this time with me. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next journey through history. Good night.